My father had a small hotel, nothing big in the city. And at some point, somehow we ended up in Montreal, Canada.
Oh.
That's a whole nother story. So we were living in Montreal, Canada, and my father was commuting back and forth to the city.
Wow.
So he would be like in Montreal for 10, 15 days, and then in the city for 15 days, and back and forth for about 2 years. I was actually born in Montreal. So I was born in 1966. And then in 1969, I think they had it with their whole him commuting. And my mother had 4 children, under the age of 7. So my father, they decided to move to back towards the city. And they were watching TV one day, and on the TV it said, one of the best places to live outside the city is Scarsdale. So my father said, that's where we'll live. They said the best school systems, and this is literally how this story happens. So they thought, we'll go to Scarsdale, and they drove to Scarsdale, and they looked around, and they stopped some boy on a bicycle, and they asked him what the best elementary was, and the kid said, Heathcote.
Okay.
Said, that's where we'll buy a house. We'll buy a house in Heathcote. So they started looking for homes. Now, my mother, she looks white. If you ever saw her, you would think that she was white. She was raised in North Carolina in the very segregated, prejudiced South. On the Black side of tracks. Her grandfather was white and owned a plantation and had relations with her grandmother, my great grandmother.
Was she a slave?
She was born in like 18. She was born like 2 years out of slavery, probably, but she lived on the plantation for like
functionally. Functionally, I'm sure the relationship was,
Yes, absolutely. So Mr. Proctor and my great grandmother had a relation, and they had a child. And my grandmother was very dark skinned, and my great grandmother was very dark skinned, and Mr. Proctor obviously was white. And my grandmother was born, and she was light skinned, which I think was very upsetting to her mother. Because it was kind of shameful, because now everyone knew that she was in whatever sort of relationship that was. And then my grandmother married my grandfather, who was also light-skinned. So that side of the family, my mother's side is very light. My mother's one of 6, and she was the lightest, and she looks white. I can send you a picture later. So they moved to, so they started looking in Scarsdale, and my father and mother looked at houses. Some of the houses my father didn't look at, if the family was going to be home. This is 1969. And then so my parents looked at the house, and the owners were not home on Winmore Road. I will not use the name of the owner. That's at your liberty. I'm not going to say that, but I have a lot of documentation here. And they looked at the house, a very small house on Winmore Road. I don't know if you know Winmore Road, but the house is back then, it's still there, this house. It's 22 Winmore, a very small house. And they wanted it. They went to contract. At contract, my father came. And that was the first time that the owners had seen my parents. And so they actually signed the contract. And then that evening, they got home, and my father received a phone call from the owner of the home saying, my wife is threatening to kill herself. She is going to pull up all the plants outside the house if you buy this house. We had no idea that you were Black, and she can't do it. I will give you 10. Now the house was, we think it was about $40,000 at the time. I'm going to give you $10,000. Think of that. The house is $40,000 in 1969, which is a lot of money now. Yeah. And I'm going to give you $10,000 to get out of this deal.
Oh my God.
And my father said, this is the story my brothers and I have said, and we found writings that from my mother that substantiate it very much. But the whole story we've always heard was then my father said to him, I'm very sorry your wife is going to kill herself, but that is our house. And so a few days later, the owner of the home sent my father a letter.
Oh, man.
And he wrote, I'll just read the first paragraph of it.
Yeah.
June 27th, 1969. Dear Mr. Evans, I regret that the incidents which caused me to speak to you on Thursday night came up. But now that the air is cleared, I want to assure you that we will be proceeding in an orderly and direct fashion on the sale of the house to you. And then he says he'll send him all sorts of information about, where to get your laundry done, all this stuff. And he said, I'm sure that the last paragraph is, I'm sure you will find the house and the neighborhood an interesting one to live in. That's really welcoming.
Yeah.
And I expect to see you in person on the date of the closing. Very truly yours, blah, blah. Who actually was a prominent figure in Scarsdale. I believe it. So then I guess a few more days went by and he sent my father another letter, which I have. I'll just read the very part. By the way, my brother has like thousands of pages of my mother's writings and things and found all of this, which is pretty amazing.
Wow.
And then he writes, so he sends my father all this like a list of everything that the cleaners, who could do the roof for you, the electrical work, spraying the trees. It's 4 pages long of very nice thing to give to someone who will be moving into the neighborhood. And so the letter that he puts on top of it is a handwritten note. And it just says, I thought the attached would be of interest. I'll prepare additional material on the house and the neighbors as time permits. I'm aware that, I'm sure that you'll be pleased to know that the Vogels at 18 Widmore will organize a small gathering to welcome you to the community after you move in. And then he signs it. And then my father writes back, which this letter I just feel like is so well worded. I'm sure my mother had a hand in this too. Dear Mr. Blah, I have received your 2 letters and I am sure I will profit from your experiences. Do not interpret this as being unfriendly, but we will not attend a welcoming. I regret the strain and pressure, this makes me a little emotional, to which we have been subjected, to which we have been, it's my father's handwriting, sorry, to which we have been subjected, causing an event in my family's life to be spoiled that should have otherwise been a happy experience. Please inform our neighbors that we will keep to ourselves. In spite of this poor start, we intend to have a happy life in our new home. Sincerely, Reginald and Joretta Evans.
Wow.
So that was my parents' welcoming to Scarsdale.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume you don't have any understanding of why the dude changed his tune, the seller changed his tune.
I think that because they were already in contract, I don't think that they really could get out of it. I mean, I don't know.
No.
That's what I'm wondering. So my mother, another writing that my brother found was my mother telling the story of, so Mrs. Vogel became my mother's very close friend. And so Mrs. Vogel, she must have told my mother the story because she says that they heard screaming and that she was pulling up the bushes outside the house and calling the neighbors. I didn't mean to do it. I didn't know they were Black. I didn't know. Like, honestly, insane. She's moving away.
They weren't staying in Scarsdale.
They weren't staying. No, they stayed in Scarsdale.
Oh.
They stayed in Scarsdale because this is such a strange story. Years later, I am the camp counselor at Scarsdale Rec Camp. And I am the counselor for the 7th graders. And this girl in my group, it's a very common last name, the name that this family had. So this girl's name is, I'll say Smith. It is not
Right.
Smith. So I see Smith on there and I'm like, oh, are your parents blah, blah, and blah, blah? And she said, yes. I said, oh, you have to go home tonight and tell your parents that my name's Joretta, the same as my mother's.
Right.
Joretta Evans is your camp counselor. Go home and tell them that, and then tell me what they say tomorrow. So she went home. I told my parents, they're like, this is brilliant. I'm like, what are the chances of this? So she came back and she said her mother started screaming up the stairs to the father calling by name, and he came downstairs, and she said, my mother was screaming my father's name, and he came downstairs, and she couldn't believe it, and she just kept saying she couldn't believe that you were my counselor.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I don't know why they ended up really going through with it. My brothers and I think maybe just because it was once you're in contract.
But to be bending over backwards at some point, like what that was about.
Well, he was a very prominent figure in
Yeah.
Scarsdale. Very. So maybe he realized if that got out, it would be quite shameful. My brother Todd remembers pulling up to the house when we were moving in, and that when they pulled up, he said everything was pulled out, and it was so obvious that she truly had pulled out everything, and that my parents said, stay in the car, let's make sure everything's okay, because that's a very jarring and frightening feeling. And so they kept all of us in the car, and they checked around the house and went in to make sure that nothing else was.
And this is after the closing?
This was after the closing. This was when it was now our house.
So despite his letter, she still
tore up. She still screwed us. She still wanted us to know that we weren't welcome there. Isn't that terrible?
That's awful.
Awful. So that was 1969. And my father paid all cash for the house. So, which really probably was the only way you could get a house at the time.
Were they represented by a real estate broker?
Yes, they were.
And to your knowledge, they weren't steered away from areas or anything like that?
To our knowledge, no. My mother has something about Mrs. Lillianfield was our realtor, and she was a very wonderful woman. And my mother said to her, some people aren't going to want to sell us the house. I actually have a thing here, a letter about it. And Mrs. Lillianfield's like, no, that wouldn't happen. You're so sweet. That wouldn't happen. And my mother was like, oh, that was so naive of her to think. But yes.
It's a crazy thing to do, to trash the house. I'll say on the outside.
On the outside.
Where the neighbors can see it. If you want to trash pull out your oven and tip the fridge over or whatever. Right. But you're telling the neighbors who you are.
Yes. And that's the story that Mrs. Vogel related. It was the night before we moved in, her just screaming and tearing up everything.
Because it's also a slightly different angle. Like there's the angle of, I'm not racist, but I don't want my neighbors to be upset.
Right.
And that to me would be the man's reaction, which is, I'm going to tell you who to trim your trees. I'm going to do everything to make you a good neighbor, to not bother, to make the other neighbors feel like I didn't screw them. Mm-hmm. But then there's this, which just feels like direct animus. It doesn't seem to be related to offending the neighbors.
No, that was in her core. That was they were moving away. That was, I don't want to screw over my neighbors, but that was more right. I can't believe that a Black family is going to live in my house. I don't want them in my house.
Wow. And then, so you would have been 3.
Yes.
Right? So then when you were camp counselor, you were 13, 14, 15, something like that. Right. So at least that.
Yes. And we had all known that story for so long. And, and then my parents, they went in, I even said this at my mother's eulogy. I said, when we moved to Scarsdale, I said, we were not welcomed very nicely. I said, and my mother was ready for a fight. I mean, my parents were very much, because of that, well, obviously they were wondering anyway, they're moving into a white community where there are only 5 or 6 or 7 Black families at that point. But that really had them ready. They were not friendly. They were waiting, they assumed that all the neighbors had the same feelings. It took a while to break through. And I'm sure Mrs. Vogel, my mother's next door neighbor, who was the most wonderful woman, I'm sure it took her a lot of effort to try to become friends with my mother. And my father did stay to himself. He always did. He didn't really socialize very much, but my mother ended up having, a nice group of friends. And Winmore Road is such a nice place. It's such a beautiful street. All the homes, they're not big. It's like a true neighborhood street. So I remember it very warmly, but I know that it started off in a very terrible way.
And what about your parents gave them that kind of courage or fortitude or whatever? Was that just the way they were, or the way she came out of the South? Or what was it that drove them? Because I could see a lot of people saying that's not worth it.
Right. I think that my mother, she had some very rough experiences growing up, very, very tough. And I think that, then she left the South, she got her degree, then she got her master's. And I think that in her mind, anything was possible, and my children are going to have the best of whatever. And we are going to do what's right for them, and they're going to get the best education, and they're going to do as well as they can in life. And, to hell with who wants to put up something for us to have to, go through. This is where we want to be.
Well, what was her degree in?
She got her master's in physical education.
Oh, okay.
But she was an English major in college and one of the best writers.
Okay.
Personally.
Helped your father, the hotelier, write his letter.
No, I don't want you to think the hotel was anything fancy. It was not. But my father worked his butt off to get that hotel. He really did.
Yeah. Wow.
And then we lived there until I was in 4th grade, and then we moved to Brookby Road, which is really just like over the bypass, still Heathcote schools at that point. And we moved to Brookby Road, and that experience was much better. But my brother reminded me that the family whose house we bought, they didn't have a realtor, and they were selling it on their own. And at the last kind of second, they ended up trying to pull back from the deal. And my brother said he remembers my parents leaving the house one night and running over to Brookby Road, and they sat with them for an hour to reassure them that we were good people. And the thing about that one is that we had already lived in Scarsdale.
Right.
Like, we're already known, we're good people. Like, come on. So that one, I think, also was disheartening, and that really ended up being my parents' dream house. And just my mother, the love she had for that home was amazing.
And what year was that then?
So that was 1975 or 6, I would say.
It's late.
Yeah, it's late. It's a little late.
It's a little late to have that attitude.
Yes.
I mean, it was late in '69 too, but I'm just saying, I would have hoped.
Well, I found out that when I bought my house, I live in White Plains, my neighbor, with everything going on with George Floyd and what's going on in our society right now, she told me that the lawyer for her house told her that, so we moved in 94, my husband and I, and 6 months later, our next door neighbors who'd been there for 35 years moved. And she said that her lawyer said that their lawyer told them that they were leaving because a Black family was moving in, and they were worried that their property value was going to go down. That was 94.
Wow.
So,
wow.
As we have come,
yeah,
there's room for improvement.
For sure. So at the original house,
yes.
For the first few years, did you have kids you played with on the street?
Yes, absolutely. We had good friends on the street. I think all the neighbors were good. We have some best friends. The Olsons lived up the street a little bit on Secor. So we really had, the Gardners were next door on our left. We had a really nice community. We'd ride our bikes all over. Went to Heathcote School, was just at the bottom of the hill. So it was a really, really nice place to raise, your children.
And at that age, did you feel different, or you're just one of the kids?
At that age, I always felt different in the sense that, first of all, my parents were very much open to us that we were Black,
right,
and that we're some of the only people who are Black. So, just you know that. And my parents also, I think, were always waiting for slights and things to happen. They were always waiting for our friends to get old enough where their families said, don't play with them anymore.
Mm.
And they kept waiting for us to have our friends drop us. That was just the thought process they had, and that's what they thought might happen. And it did not happen. I had great friends in Scarsdale. It did not. I had some experiences, but I had great friends. Some of my best friends today are from growing up.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great. Huh. So you go through Heathcote, then the middle school, then the high school.
Yes.
And you had Rashid?
Yes, I had Rashid. So I have to say I was a psychology major, and I think it was because when he first started there, I think the first class that he really taught, or at least my recollection, because he started my freshman year of high school. So I think the first class that he taught was psychology. And after that, I was like, I'm going to be a psychology major. and to see a Black teacher was just huge. Recently, someone wrote in that Scarsdale Facebook page, actually 2 days ago or yesterday, that Miss Brooks, who was our music teacher, and she was a Black woman. And I remember she was my teacher. And for me to have her as my teacher was so impactful. So Ms. Brooks and Mr. Silvera were very important to see people who look like you when you're seeing so few. I rhymed. So that was, that he had a big impact on me.
Is she the one who had a little TV show, or is that before?
Miss Brooks? I'm not sure.
There was a Black music teacher, I think, who had a little TV show sometime, but maybe she was earlier.
Okay, well, I know that she was at Quaker Ridge.
Okay.
So she was in elementary school, so she may have, and then she moved to the middle school, and then I think at some point she was a high school teacher also.
Okay. And I mean, it's so funny because to tease out Rashid, to tease out his Blackness versus all the other things that he brings to the table, it's very easy to fall in love with him,
right?
Whatever your color is.
Yes.
But I guess it probably has an extra impact to see somebody like that, you know.
Yes, it does. And when I was listening to his interview, it was interesting how even for himself, that wasn't an important part of his story. But to me, it was.
Yes.
So when he was kind of like, well, that being Black wasn't really that much part of his experience in Scarsdale having any real effect to it. I think that he doesn't realize on the other side of that if you didn't have anyone Black in your teachings, how big an impact that was.
Right. At any stage along the way, did you have other Black classmates or friends?
Yes, I had a few along the way. I wouldn't say like incredibly close.
Yeah.
Richard Busby was my year. He was a nice friend throughout. Wonderful, wonderful person. And there were 2 Black friends in elementary school. So in Heathcote, if somebody moved in who was Black, my mother was immediately friends with them. So that was really nice. Kim Moore became one of my friends during the time that I was in elementary school. I'm trying to think. The Fosters, like Frank Foster and Jardice Foster, we were always friendly. The Graves, Mrs. Graves was my mother's very best friend. So Mrs. Graves and Mrs. Graham were my mother's 2 best friends for all the years. Wow. And Mrs. Graves my mother had Alzheimer's, and Mrs. Graves was like the one friend who continued to call me and check in on my mother and visit her.
Oh, that's so nice.
So that's really nice. And we were friends with the Graves. And I would say, I might be leaving someone out, sorry.
Yeah. It's all right. If you leave them out and they see the video, they can comment, hey, you forgot about me. Sorry, all right. We'll put you in the addendum. Wow.
And overall, I mean, my friendships, my experiences were great. I always felt fortunate to grow up in Scarsdale. I think, you know, it makes you a lot of who you are. I did have about 3 experiences that were really upsetting and just, you know, really disappointing. One was related to the prom. One was related to somebody saying they should put me in a crate and ship me back to Africa. So I had a few things that were impactful and lasting, and you know, from people who were my friends. And then
Oh God.
other things happened. So
It's like I don't know. The quicksand is the wrong metaphor, but like Russian roulette or something like
yes,
that.
yes,
Like having a very typical life, but at any moment something
right.
can just drop out. You don't know when. It could be in 6 months. It could be another year or something like that. But
Absolutely.
you
And
can't.
just, you know, being welcomed into people's homes. My friends' families were wonderful. They really, in general, always, you know, treated me so incredibly well. I'm still close with a lot of families. But I would say my prom story is my most upsetting, which is someone who I was in school with from 4th grade. One of my closest friends, still is, I will not use his name,
Yeah.
still is. And he invited me, he asked me to go to the prom, and I said yes, of course. My good friend, we weren't dating, nothing going on, just my close friend. And my mother, I came home, I told my mother, I was so happy. And my mother immediately said, did he tell his parents? And I said, Mommy, I don't know if he told his parents. She said, did he tell it? Find out if he told his parents. And I was like, okay. And I was very annoyed because I knew what she meant. And so every day I would say, did you tell your parents you're going to the prom with me? No, 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 no. And I think it was like the 5th day at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a knock on our door. And I opened the door and he was standing there and he said, I can't take you to the prom. My parents, you know, are assholes. They won't let me take you to the prom because you're not Jewish and you're Black. And
This is
I was devastated. I was devastated. I couldn't believe it.
this is 84.
This is 84. And I had been at their home. I'm talking one of my very best friends, all the time, growing up, all the time. They knew me incredibly well. So that was devastating. And then of course I was hysterical. And my mother said, that's why I was asking you. I didn't think it was going to be okay. And then another good friend ended up inviting me to the prom, and his parents were from Israel. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to happen. And they were lovely. They came to our house, they took pictures, and everything was fine and great. And I asked him right away, I'm like, go home and tell your parents. He said, I'm going home. I'm going to tell them right now. So, but that was really devastating. That to me was like, wow, I thought I was, I don't know, not part of your family, but I thought I was as welcome as my other 10 friends.
Right. It makes you reevaluate everything. You're looking back,
Yes.
saying, you know, so it was all just a facade.
Right.
Did you ever go back to his house?
I did go back to his house, and I was at his wedding. And the day after his wedding, or the day of his wedding, he said to me that his parents said, you know, why wasn't Joretta at the rehearsal dinner? She's like family. And
Not quite, but yeah. Okay.
right. I said, oh, I am not family. I am not family. That's not true.
So it's like, I'm sorry. He said that, they said that to him.
They said that to him. They couldn't understand why I wasn't at the rehearsal dinner.
And did he say?
No.
He just blew it off or whatever.
Right. That was it. And then I told him that, so I worked for the Red Cross for many years, and I did their diversity training. So once a month, I would do the diversity training for all the new hires. And part of it was we would put stereotypes and prejudices up on the wall, and we would tell stories. And so I would start it to make everyone feel comfortable. And I told this story about him every year for 11 years, every once a month for 11 years. And I told him, I said, I tell a story about you once a month. I said, and the strange thing is, it's become like a story I tell.
Right.
But some days I would start crying as I would tell the story. I would like all of a sudden get so emotional.
Yeah.
And I would think, I tell this story, it's become a story. But depending on what was going on in my life would depend on how that story would affect me. It sometimes, and to this day, if I tell that story, sometimes I'll get a crack in my voice and I'll think, God, I'm gonna cry over this. Like,
Right.
it's so surprising to me, but sometimes it hits me.
The way also, the way that story ends with the echo in the wedding party reminds me of the letter to your dad after buying the house, of getting a direct racist treatment and being expected to forgive instantly.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And and whether it's somebody who's acknowledging being racist or saying I'm not racist, but property values or neighbors or appearances or whatever, but they're expecting you to understand and be okay with it.
Right. To be almost be thankful that they have that they've moved on from this. Okay.
Right. You'd be like, Joretta, I'm good. I'm good, Joretta.
Right.
Aren't you happy for me?
Right. And I remember saying to my friend, I said, you probably rarely thought about that again. I thought about that. Well, not all the time, but
right.
a lot. I mean.
And he had not thought about it?
No, not really. No, not really.
Hmm.
So very, very, that was upsetting.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing about growing up in Scarsdale when you're one of very few is that, and you're Black. So a lot of Black people who grow up in neighborhoods like Scarsdale, they then become members of Jack and Jill. And that's where they meet a lot of other affluent Black families. So
what is Jack and Jill? I don't.
I wasn't a member, but so Jack and Jill is an organization, and a lot of Black families from all over in different suburbs belong to it, and they have events, and kids get to know each other, and families get to know each other, and so you're around. So you might grow up in Scarsdale or Chappaqua or Rye, but you're a member of Jack and Jill. So on the weekends, you go to Jack and Jill parties and gatherings. And then your kids, even though they're around all white people, get to experience Black culture and have Black friends and feel really comfortable and around Black people.
Mm-hmm.
But if you grow up in like me, I grew up in Scarsdale. So my parents made a choice not to join Jack and Jill. My father is very antisocial, but not to join Jack and Jill. And so the Black people that we were around were the few in Scarsdale, and then our family, our relatives. But that was it. I didn't really have Black close friends. I thought when I went to college, I went to Syracuse, I thought when I went to college that I would immediately form this great group of Black friends. And it didn't happen. Every Sunday I'd call my parents, I'd be like, I keep trying to find my Black friends and I can't do it. And I would make attempts, and I don't know how to explain it, but because there's an assumption, but at least for me, there was an assumption that I was possibly trying to play it white. So you naturally become friends with people who you are naturally comfortable with. So I got to my dorm, I started to make friends, I became friends with people on my floor, but then I tried to find Black friends, and I would get in a gathering, and I just, I don't know, I couldn't be what maybe they expected me to be. It's a very confusing world to be in. And you feel like you don't totally belong in either place. And
Right.
that's really terrible because, I'm so Black in my core. I'm so Black, my thoughts, my beliefs, like I'm so, but yeah, the majority of my friends are white. But now as an adult, I have Black friends, but it was very hard period of time. And I think that for me, I felt like, gosh, I was going to go to college and just make all these Black friends. And it didn't happen.
You think it would have been any easier if you did Jack and Jill, or?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. 100. And I went to a few, like 1 or 2 Jack and Jill parties, I think through the Graves. And, it definitely would have helped me a lot.
Boy, it's like a foot in 2 camps, but not really in either one.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And like the signaling is so complex of what you're,
Yeah, and it sounds strange to even say, I don't know, it sounds very strange to even say that you don't feel that you fit in with the Black community, but that was when I was younger. Now as an adult, I have Black friends. I'm good, but my kids, I didn't want them to feel like that. So we live in White Plains, which is the best of everything. It's economically diverse. It's racially diverse. My kids can go in and out of Black, white, Hispanic. They can go in and out of groups so easily. It's seamless, and I marvel at it.
Yeah.
I think, gosh, that's so incredible. And my father even said, wow, I don't know what I was thinking when he was like 80, 70 something. He said to me, we should have moved to White Plains. Why did we move to Scarsdale? I'm like, well, you thought you were doing the best thing, but White Plains really ended up, and for me and my family, ended up being the best. It's like a hidden gem for me.
Was Scarsdale even a remote possibility, or that's not what we're going for?
Was White Plains? Oh, for me, for Scarsdale? No, absolutely not. No way.
Despite enjoying being there, the kind of the cultural difficulties said, I don't want my kids to have to go through that.
Not a chance. No way. And I will say, I loved growing up in Scarsdale. I really did. For all of my friends out there, no, I really did. I loved it. I did. But no, I would never recommend that anyone should be 1 or 2 or 10 of any. I think it's it's a disservice to yourself, to be the only Jewish person, to be the only Black person, to be the only gay person. I just feel like you should just be able to look and see people that look like you more. And I didn't want it for my children. And my husband, the funny thing is, he grew up in Pearl River, and he's Black. And so the reason we were able, I think, to be together was that we both grew up I think he might've had less Blacks in Pearl River even. So we both grew up in a totally different cultures, but in similar situations where he was one of 2 Black families or 5, and I think his was less, and we were one of, it seemed like 7, but I found my mother had this Black caucus list here.
Wow.
There are like 29 families on here.
But I guess the kids are probably of all different ages, so you wouldn't know. If there's 29 and assuming some are out, that's 2 per grade, basically.
Right, it's not really that much, right? You're right. Because I was shocked. I really felt like I counted, and in my head, I'm like, yeah, there were 7 families that I thought of really growing up. And then by the time I got to high school, I'm like, well, if I add in some, I could get to 9. But yes, you're right.
It's a crazy thing to be able to count them.
Yeah.
I can't
on
count.
2 hands.
right. And just to be able to, 30 years later, reel off their names. I couldn't tell you who's on my street. Even right now, I don't even know my next door neighbor's last names. I'm exaggerating, but
So true.
Wow. Huh. That's really, really wild. Did your parents, other than that, did your parents ever reflect back on Scarsdale about whether it met or didn't meet their expectations?
I think, yes. I mean, my parents talked about, their Scarsdale experience. My mother loved being in Scarsdale. I think my mother growing up very, very poor in the South, living in Scarsdale. I mean, how on earth did this person who didn't have a dime to go to the movies end up in Scarsdale? It's pretty amazing. And my father also, he didn't go to college. He got his GED. He worked as a sky cap. He saved a ton of money. He saved money, and then he was able to buy this hotel. It had 40 rooms. He wanted to turn it into like a boarding house, and then somebody told him, no, make it a hotel. You'll do better as a hotel. And just their story is unbelievable. So I think the pride that they had, that they raised 4 children in Scarsdale and sent them to great schools and lived out their lives there, I think the good way overweighed the bad. I mean, it just did. And for my mother, who made some really, she didn't have a lot of friends, but she had some very close friends. And she attended every event, you know, it just, and the fact that we weren't dropped, you know, they kept waiting for our friends to drop us. And for the fact that it didn't happen, I think was a success.
Do you think that feeling ever relaxed, or?
Yeah, maybe late. I don't know. I think they were waiting for prom to end.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that reinforced it.
Right. And weddings, were you going to be were you going to be allowed, were people going to include you in their weddings? I don't know. I wonder if it really ever relaxed for them.
It's a really tough thing, because things can happen to you not for race.
Yes.
And you don't know.
Right. That's exactly it. You never know. You
never know. You know, did they have to pare it down because of budgetary constraints?
Right.
Or is there the racist uncle is going to have a problem with it? But you know, you'll never know.
Yep.
You know, because you've had enough experiences that you know it could be. It's
right.
Plausible.
Right.
That's tough. I mean, I guess you've got to be simultaneously kind of like wary and hopeful, or you're in this kind of suspended state.
Yeah, and then at some point, I think you really realize you have your friends who you're like, I don't know, you know, maybe that could happen where I'll be excluded from something. But then you have your core friends whose families you feel from the time you were young have truly been there for you and supported you, and you really know they're the real deal. And I have, you know, 6 families that I really truly feel that way about from Scarsdale.
That's really cool. And you keep up with them? And
very close. I would say I have 4 close friends from Scarsdale that I speak to regularly. And then I would say I have 10. I'm the one who plans all our reunions. So I don't know how that happened, but I plan. We just had our 35th, so I'm still, you know, pretty surrounded by Scarsdale.
Were you like senior class?
No, it's ridiculous. No. I just resigned last reunion. I said, I will never be doing this again. It's been a labor of love, but it's been a labor.
Yeah.
But no, I wasn't. Somehow our president just checked out of it, and I'm a nice person.
And you stood up.
I said yes.
In high school, had you done any extracurriculars or sports or anything?
I played on the softball team. I was the girls' basketball team manager. I wasn't good enough. I tried, but I didn't have the skill. So as the manager, those were really fun times for me. Softball was great. And yeah, those were my 2 real things that I did.
I spoke to someone who wasn't an athlete, but she was a fan, and described feeling a little mixed when Scarsdale would play against Black schools.
Yes.
And did you have that feeling either home or away?
100%.
What was that like?
It's just, it's uncomfortable in a way, because you know that the Black girls on that team are looking at you like, what the heck are you doing? You know, it's an uncomfortable thing. And then also, I think on the Scarsdale side, you know, the chatter on the bus, it could be that, you know, we think we're better than them, and you know, is it coming out of we're better than them economically? Is it because they're Black? So I think bus rides at times to Black schools, usually nothing happened, but you're sitting there kind of thinking, I hope someone doesn't say something that's going to make me uncomfortable. Like I hope it doesn't happen, because that, through the years always happened. Somebody takes a joke, somebody says something, and you're just like, like I'm sitting right here. I know you all know I'm Black. Like, could we like check ourselves a little? So I think for that, you always had a feeling like, we're going to Mount Vernon, we're going to White Plains. Like, is somebody going to say something that's going to just make me feel uncomfortable? And for me, was not outspoken like that. I was not. I would just like sit there and put my head down. I mean, I had a few things where I literally just thought, gosh, I'd put my head down like, don't you know I'm sitting here? Yeah. It's just so uncomfortable.
As kids can be pretty insensitive to other people's emotions,
Yes, absolutely.
And not even realize that how upsetting it could be.
Right.
Because you're one of us. You're like us. You don't talk like that. You don't act like that.
Right.
So why would you be offended?
Color. I don't, that whole, I don't see color. It's like, well, you should. Especially you who just made that bad joke. You should see color. You should. It makes me who I am. It's part of my whole history.
It seems related to what you said earlier about the effect on you as a student, or anybody as a student, being the only Black kid on the bus or whatever. It seems also that being a one Black kid on the bus would not raise awareness like 10 Black kids on the bus.
No, definitely not.
Because you also have to step out there on your own and then make the decision, am I going to be the strident one who loses friends over calling people out for this, or am I going to just lump it and internalize it and get along?
Right. And for me, that was always the internalize. I had one or two situations where one especially in 7th grade, where I just lost it. I must have had it, when this kid who had been saying some rude stuff to me said to me, I'll never forget it, outside the principal's office. It was between like Popham and Cooper. And he just he said, I'll put you in a crate and ship you back to Africa. And he had been needling me, saying stuff to me constantly. And I just went crazy. And my close friend, Eleanor, who was so quick with it, said that he was overweight. He said, why don't you eat your mother? And it was like brilliant. I thought it was the greatest comment. And then I just literally grabbed him and I started kicking him and screaming. And the principal came out and kind of pulled me off him. And I kept screaming, which was totally not my demeanor.
Yeah.
I just kept going. I said, tell him to never speak to me again. Tell him to never look at me or ever speak to me again. And then he didn't talk to me again until sophomore year. That was 7th grade, sophomore year, high school. And one day we were the only two walking down the hallway, and he said, hi, Joretta. And I said, hi, blah, blah. And we started saying hello to each other one by one, and then he came to the senior class breakfast dressed as a pimp in blackface. And I have a picture in a photo album where I have him there. I put him on a page all by himself. And I thought, now looking back, how did Scarsdale High School, how did no one in the school send him home? Literally, I mean, dressed as a pimp, blackface. How did somebody send him home? And that was one of those times where you're just like, ugh, but this is uncomfortable.
In the middle school incident, did it go above when the principal pulled him off? Were the parents called? Was anything?
No, it didn't go above that. I went home and told my parents, and my parents were not called.
They didn't feel like it needed to be escalated or anything like that. Huh.
Put me in a crate and ship me back to Africa. I was like, I grew up here. At the time, I was literally like, why are you shipping me to Africa? Like, oh gosh. Man, you're such a jerk.
Oh God. And so when he came, so in the blackface now.
Yes.
Is that now in a book, in a program somewhere?
So no, I that day I must have been I won't say his name, and taken a picture of him. I know exactly where it is. I have the most clear picture of him from his knees up, standing there as a pimp, so proudly posing for me, taking that picture. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. So if he ever wants to run for Congress or whatever.
Yeah, ruined. My daughter said that to me the other night. I mentioned the picture again. And she goes, Mommy, you could ruin his career with that. I go, I know. I'm like, that's crazy. But he was not sent home or anything. It was like, that was 84. Come on.
84.
And everyone was, laughing. I think some people were like shocked, but no one was really shocked because that really, that it wasn't shocking coming from him. So I'll say that.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Amazing.
But really overall, I loved Scarsdale. I don't want to lose that.
Look, I mean, I it's funny because you fall into it, because if we were talking about not about race, if we were talking about sports or academics, and hinging on that, you would be talking about successes and failures and whatever. Just because we're talking about it, you're drawn to the parts that are sticking out.
Right.
So I think I think that the tone is, but that said, other people would describe growing up in Scarsdale with all the same words as you, but without the "but then."
Right. Yeah.
Without any of those "but thens." Just straight. I loved Scarsdale. There were a few instances, but I still loved it. There was there would be no qualifiers.
Yes, you're right.
In those cases, but again, the overall. What I'm gathering is the overall feeling that you have today is much more favorable than the anecdotes that you drop out when we're talking about race.
Absolutely. And even like just my friends' families, I just feel like I don't know, I feel like I learned so much being in Scarsdale, just being around certain families. And I don't know, I think it really shapes who you are, and I'm happy with who I am. So I really appreciate that upbringing. I truly, truly do.
Do you think them having a Black friend helped them?
I think it should have.
I think it should have too. But
I think that now, as adults, I feel like my close friends who have me as their one or two Black friends in the world, I really feel like there's a level of pride that they have a really close Black friend. I really truly believe that. I think that it makes them feel really good, and it's genuine, and it's me, and I appreciate that. And I do think that in high school more than in the younger years, that having me as part of their lives, and I'm not talking about my closest now, just everyone, I feel like it should have helped them. I hope it opened their eyes and made them not think that, whatever stereotype they had about Black people is true. I had a big afro. I mean, I had an afro until 8th grade, when Mrs. Graves came to my house and she said to my mother, "We're going to straighten her hair. Joretta cannot have an afro anymore." And my mother had really white hair. So Mrs. Graves straightened my hair in the kitchen sink. So, I mean, you definitely knew I was Black. There was no denying it with my afro. And I think that, I hope that people look back and it helped them be more open. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't think that it had no effect.
Right.
But it's just interesting too, because, we all think of things from our own perspective. And I tend to minimize my effect on others, and I think of how other people affected me.
Yeah. Yes.
But if I think back about somebody who I knew was gay, reading about people who are gay, or seeing movies about people, but having friends with gay, it shifts you a pretty large distance.
Right. Absolutely.
I don't know much about women's hair or Black hair. What happened when Miss Graves, she goes in the kitchen? What does she actually do? Because it's a very intimate moment for Miss Graves to be doing. She didn't have to do it herself, but
It's a box this big, and it's this cream relaxer, and it's a jar with cream in it, and you pour a little activator in it, and you mix it up, and I remember sitting there so clearly, and she put this cream in my hair, and she kept working it and pulling it straight, and my afro was beautiful.
oh,
I had one of the best afros around. It was literally, I can still pat it. It was this big. So and I used to have like longer hair, and my mother wanted me in second grade, I think, to have a haircut like my friend Pam Glideman. So my mother cut my hair short, and I think Pam had like the Dorothy Hamill, whatever, haircut. And then we washed my hair, and it came out as an afro.
Your mom had no idea.
From like second grade on, I had this afro. So she washed it in the sink, and then she straightened it, and then she washed it after. And I remember she blew it dry. I remember looking in the mirror and just being in shock. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy.
Oh,
wow, now I can start to feel like all my friends. I used to just dream of having hair like my friends. Think of that. You're black and you have this afro, and all your friends have this flowing long hair, and
right.
I just used to fantasize about it.
Do you have to maintain it then?
Yes, now I cream relax on my own.
Oh, but I mean, when you were young, did you have to do stuff like blow it out or whatever?
Yes, I always had to blow dry my hair, and I would tie it so it would flatten, and it was a whole ordeal.
It's funny because your mom, it's like you read about white people who adopt a black kid, and they have no idea.
Right.
They have absolutely no idea. And then they have to go to the black beauty salon and be like, what do I do? It's not coming out the way she wants.
Right. And my mother's black, but her side of the family was pretty light, and she was the whitest. So she just didn't know what to do with my hair.
And the dads don't care. Dads don't know or care.
That's it.
When you hear about a dad who knows how to braid hair, they put him on Facebook like a hero.
It's so true. It's so true. By the way, my husband just snuck by.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very true. So that's a really funny story. I'm glad I got to tell my Mrs. Graves straightening story.
That's really epic. All right. Thanks so much, Joretta.
All right. Take care.
Great.
Thank you.
Right,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.